Why does spiritual awakening leave you feeling isolated rather than unified? Why does personal evolution make it seem like you're drifting away from everyone around you? You might assume that awakening would bring euphoria, like finally emerging from a dense mist with newfound clarity, yet something unexpected occurs. The world appears different. People's voices carry a different tone. Exchanges that once brought comfort now ring empty. You're not attempting to judge anyone, nor do you consider yourself superior, but there has been a shift. You're sitting with a friend who is discussing the same routine weekend activities, the same social drama, the same recurring grievances, and suddenly tension builds in your chest. You acknowledge them. You maintain a pleasant expression, but internally you feel utterly separated, as though you exist on an entirely different plane. No, a completely different wavelength. And here is what nobody prepares you for. The deeper your awakening becomes, the more isolated you might initially feel. So what is behind this phenomenon? Why do social interactions become draining when you've simply evolved? This isn't about becoming antisocial. It is not exhaustion. It is not cynicism toward humanity. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist, recognized this spiritual weariness long before it became part of common discourse. He didn't simply label it awakening. He termed it individuation, a psychological and spiritual transformation that carries unexpected consequences. In this exploration, we'll examine why human connection transforms following spiritual awakening, why you begin seeking substance over superficiality, and why shallow exchanges feel abrasive to your very being. But we won't approach this through abstract philosophy. We're diving into the genuine, tangible human dimension of this experience, the internal struggle, the remorse, the loss, and the transformation that can emerge afterward. So if you've experienced exhaustion after spending time with people you once cherished, if you've questioned why everyone seems so overwhelming, so unconscious, so distant, continue with me. Because when we conclude, you'll understand you're not losing your mind, you're awakening. And Carl Jung provided us with insights to comprehend precisely what is unfolding within you. Jung recognized that most individuals wear a facade, not through deliberate deception, but as an instinctive defense mechanism. He named this facade the persona. It represents who we believe we must become to gain acceptance. It is the character we perform. We display it professionally among relatives, even with companions. And temporarily, this facade provides feelings of security, affection, and understanding. But awakening occurs when the persona begins fragmenting. Something within begins questioning. There is something beyond this. You start confronting difficult truths. You start declining things that previously felt automatic. And as you venture deeper, it becomes increasingly apparent. Many of your connections were established around your persona, not your genuine essence. So when that thought, something relationship simply cannot endure, that is the source of your exhaustion. Not because individuals are flawed, but because the version of you they knew no longer exists to engage with them. And here is the more challenging aspect. Your nervous system remains programmed to perform the role. You enter a space and you automatically prepare to diminish yourself, to accommodate, to amuse, to conform, simply to prevent friction. But your essence is demanding truth, alignment, and authenticity. And that friction between your conditioning and your awareness, that is what depletes you. That is what creates social burnout. Not the individuals themselves, but the aspects of you that refuse to continue pretending. The reality is, awakening isn't about withdrawing from others. It is about embracing your completeness, so you can finally connect in ways that don't deplete your vitality. And this introduces Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. The word shadow sounds ominous, perhaps even frightening, but it is not malevolent. It is simply hidden. It encompasses all the aspects of ourselves we've been conditioned to conceal, reject, or disavow. It is our envy, our rage, our anxiety, but also, remarkably, our capacity, our genius, our instinctive strength, our sacred boundaries. The shadow isn't merely your darkness, it is your wholeness awaiting illumination. And during awakening, you begin perceiving the shadow not only within yourself, but within others as well. And it is overwhelming. Exchanges that previously seemed innocent now feel charged with unconscious dynamics. You perceive what people aren't expressing. You comprehend what lies beneath their language, their suffering, their projections, and their facades. And you recognize most interactions aren't genuinely between two individuals. They're between two personas, two meticulously constructed performances, attempting to maintain harmony, circumvent discomfort, and remain agreeable. And when that's and something, and you simply cannot participate in that performance anymore. Not because you're superior to anyone, but because your being starts rejecting what is inauthentic. It literally feels burdensome, stifling, draining. It is like attempting to breathe in a sealed chamber. You require truth like oxygen now. Authenticity becomes your sole sustenance. And here is where it becomes deeply personal. You start recognizing your shadow in others. That friend who constantly needs to be correct. Perhaps that was you previously, that co-worker who perpetually seeks affirmation. Perhaps that is the aspect of you you're still integrating. The individuals who provoke you most intensely are often reflections, mirroring the very aspects of yourself that haven't fully integrated yet. Jung stated, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And it is uncomfortable because your awakening is revealing truth in successive layers. Initially, it appears others are the issue. Then you realize you resemble them. Then you understand you still do, but you're transforming, you're selecting awareness, and that is what creates the distinction. But the pitfall in awakening is spiritual arrogance, believing you're the enlightened individual and everyone else remains unconscious. That is not development. That is simply another facade. Genuine awakening means compassion for yourself, for others, and for the earlier version of you who required those former patterns to survive. It is within that compassion that restoration begins, that weariness diminishes, that your vitality becomes less about self-protection and more about honoring your authentic self. And remarkably, as you integrate more of your shadow, you stop needing to distance yourself as intensely because you're no longer resisting your own reflection in others. And now we'll examine how emotional sensitivity and overstimulation connect to this awakening fatigue, and why your nervous system assumes a far more significant role than you realize. If you've experienced feeling excessively sensitive, excessively empathetic, or excessively aware, this will be transformative. Here is something rarely discussed regarding awakening. It is not exclusively psychological or spiritual. It is physiological as well. Your body, particularly your nervous system, is experiencing an evolution, and that brings complications. Throughout most of your existence, your nervous system adapted to turbulence, disturbance, demands, and artifice. You became accustomed to emotional interference, like persistent background disturbance that never completely disappears. and that disturbance conditioned you to remain vigilant, to assess the environment, to maintain equilibrium, to interpret the atmosphere. Especially if you're an empath or highly sensitive individual, this became your survival strategy. You didn't simply hear people, you internalized them. You didn't simply observe moods, you experienced them. You became a receptacle for other people's emotional climates. And that kind of hypervigilance exacts a tremendous cost over time. Now, introduce awakening to that equation. Awakening intensifies your perception. You don't simply notice surface dynamics. You begin sensing discord, misalignment, manipulation, even when it is unintentional. You detect unspoken elements, subtle expressions, energetic inconsistencies, and your nervous system becomes hyperactive because it hasn't yet learned how to process this elevated level of awareness. It hasn't synchronized with your consciousness, so it continues responding the former way. Tension, exhaustion, emotional overwhelm, and the impulse to retreat. And that is the aspect nobody mentions. Awakening doesn't resemble sitting serenely on a summit. It frequently resembles sensory bombardment in a congested environment. Even an ordinary conversation can feel like mental static if your body hasn't learned how to self-regulate in this new awareness. And this causes many awakened individuals to misidentify themselves as damaged. You're not damaged. You're simply no longer desensitized. You're finally experiencing what was perpetually present, but previously filtered through conditioning. And that can be exhausting. You're not excessively sensitive. You're appropriately sensitive. You're finally attuned to existence at its most unfiltered frequency. But here is the remarkable aspect. As your nervous system learns to harmonize with your elevated awareness, the overwhelm subsides, the emotional intensity lessens. You begin discerning without absorbing. You begin feeling alongside people, not instead of them. You begin observing without internalizing. And that is when social interaction becomes meaningful again. You stop needing to diminish yourself. You stop needing to construct defenses. You simply remain grounded in your essence and allow others to exist where they are. So what occurs following the exhaustion, the recalibration, and the new category of relationships you begin attracting? And how do you engage with others from your authentic self, not from obligation, responsibility, or routine? Something magnificent and genuinely liberating. The instant you cease performing, something transforms. You're no longer selecting connections from survival instinct. You're selecting from resonance. You're not accommodating to prevent conflict. You're honoring your truth, even when it is challenging. You're not remaining to be appreciated. You're remaining where you feel recognized. It is subtle, but profound. Instead of seeking security in others, you start becoming the security you once required. Carl Jung believed that integration, not flawlessness, is the objective of psychological completeness. That means unifying your conscious self, your unconscious patterns, your shadow, your illumination, your wounds, your wisdom, all of it. Not to be perfect, but to be authentic. And from that authenticity, your relationships transform. You'll observe that you begin attracting individuals who communicate your energetic dialect, who don't deplete you because they're not requesting you to diminish, who don't project their suffering onto you, but create space for yours as well. These are soul-aligned connections, and frequently they start appearing following a period of solitude. That solitude wasn't loneliness. It was your field, purifying itself, creating capacity, recalibrating your energetic parameters. When you that sort of thing, it is common to feel like something the malfunctioning, because you don't relate to individuals the way you previously did. But here is the truth. You're not intended to relate identically. You're intended to relate from a more profound place now, from presence, lucidity, and alignment. And that transforms everything. You stop mirroring other people's energy to maintain harmony. You allow your harmony to guide the dynamic. You stop demonstrating your value. You embody it. You stop engaging from obligation. You connect from intention. And this doesn't render you detached or indifferent. It renders you anchored. It renders your affection more potent because it is no longer filtered through apprehension. And yes, certain individuals will depart, not because you're abandoning them, but because they were only ever synchronized with a version of you that you've transcended. Mourning those connections is part of the awakening as well. But it is not regression. It is homecoming. Every conclusion is an invitation, and every individual who remains or arrives in your existence following this process encounters the authentic you, the one beneath the persona. And beyond the performance, Carl Jung once stated, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And this exhaustion you experienced, this disconnection, this isolation, this energetic sensitivity, it is all part of that privilege. Because the genuine reward of awakening isn't escaping people. It is reclaiming your internal space so profoundly that nobody can extract you from it again. So if you're in that peculiar space where you're weary of people, it is reclaiming your internal space so profoundly that no weary of disturbance, weary of pretending. Trust it. It signifies you're waking up. And when you emerge on the other side, you won't just relate differently. You'll exist differently. If this resonated, share it with someone who has been experiencing the same exhaustion. Share your reflections in the comments. When was the moment in your existence you realized you simply couldn't relate to certain individuals anymore? What did that experience feel like for you? And don't forget to subscribe to Fractal Wisdom. This is just the beginning of everything you're becoming.